Hello, Meagan G. How are you?
Namaste.
Thank you so much for joining today, and I'm absolutely
pleasure.
loving your sari. The fact that you come to Thailand with saris as well, that's amazing.
I go everywhere with the sari.
Do you?
Yes.
That's incredible. And you can put your own sari on, right?
I can.
That is
Sure.
impressive.
In fact, I can actually tie it now 3 or 4 different ways.
Wow.
So I'm South Indian, North Indian.
Well, you know,
Adjust.
I was taught to do this from a very, very young age. But today, I find that young people don't know how to, I say young people, they don't know how to do it. And you know, when we're at weddings and stuff, they'll call me in and ask me to put a sari on, and they'll say, "Oh, you did that like an auntie." I'm like, what is that? So anyway, good to have this conversation. I'm so impressed with the work that you have been doing. The Barefoot College. Tell me about your role, first of all, in the organization of the Barefoot College, and how did you end up living in Tilonia, running an organization which is aiming to shift lives of rural women amongst other people?
Well, I think I bring an interesting skill set to Barefoot College, and as a journey, it seems really natural now to me that I ended up there, and it's exactly where I think I should be right now at this point in my life. I came from a background, first and foremost, of incredibly strong, independent women. I'm born in New Zealand. I have a family full of mom and aunties and inspirational grandparents and women in my family who were all unique and strong and overcame a lot of different kinds of obstacles. And I also had an incredibly multicultural childhood. So I had people from different countries forever staying in our house and being part of our lives, and the world was a big place but a small place to me. And I didn't grow up in a period of time with parents who talked about barriers between cultures, between religions, or things like this. I grew up in a very academic household, a very liberal household, a very idealistic first-generation American immigrant household. So I think this is a particular mindset that I bring to everything that I do. I was a for-profit entrepreneur. I was a very serious mountain climber and explorer of the natural world, and I am a designer. And those 3 things really collide very, very strongly to bring a skill set to this organization that I think is very useful. First and foremost, I have a new idea a minute. I am forever looking at a situation and looking for the holes. Where can we change it? How can we make it better? How can we look at a new system? How can we disrupt an old system? And that has everything to do with being an entrepreneur and having an entrepreneurial approach to things. And it has everything to do with design, because I look for patterns. I look for patterns between people, between programs, between different individuals, and I look for how to reorder those patterns in a different way. And the design process is one that really inspires me. So I'm a deeply creative person, and I think that can take a lot of different kinds of form. I happen to be very creative business-wise. I'm very innovative. I like to try new things. I like to experiment. I like to push the envelope. And that brings me to the last part, which is that I'm a risk taker. Not an uncalculated risk taker, but I'm somebody who's really comfortable with being in a not so secure place. And I think that collides very well with Barefoot. There's a great quote in my office that says, growth demands a temporary loss of security. And I think that this being comfortable with fear, being comfortable with being afraid or not quite so secure, this is an incredible luck that I feel I have to feel okay in a not so comfortable space.
Yeah, I call that being a master of uncertainty, because that's a deeply spiritual lesson that any aspirant, as the rishis have called us, any spiritual seeker, if you like, will have to go traverse through that domain. It's like getting into the Ganges and then finding a flow and not resisting the flow and avoiding the boulders and the rocks along the way, but really getting comfortable with, and that's why you like diving, right? Because that's how we met, scuba diving, because the diving is all really about going deep into the into an area. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what the weather conditions are going to be. Could be wonderful outside, and down under, anything can happen. The current can change just like that, and what you're going to encounter, you don't know. So I would say that's.
I love those moments when you're diving and you can't see very clearly.
Yeah.
Because they make you go completely inward. You have to completely breathe internally. You have to get your bearings. You have to find a calm place to be in when everything around you is telling you you don't know where you are. And this is something I think that young people need to learn. And they need to learn that a little bit death by fire. Yeah. They really need to be put in uncomfortable situations that are designed for them to find their way through and out of. And I think we spend a whole lot of time as parents and as adults in the world trying to make everything perfect.
Yeah,
for
enabling
our
them,
kids.
them when they could be finding the solutions for themselves, money for themselves potentially to fund whatever it is that they want to do. But I think that shift. I don't know, it's generational, I don't know, but it's something that I agree with you that right now there's this trend of enabling your children to an nth degree. Earlier, Bunkerji was saying that young people today, one of the things that he observes is they don't have courage to stand up to their parents. Well, why would you? If everything is given to you and it's comfortable, why would you want to rock the boat?
And I found that when I went to Barefoot, I found this remarkable grassroots staff of rural, poor, non-formally educated people who had accomplished incredible things, but yet in many ways were afraid to take the next set of steps because the organization was suddenly growing around them faster than they imagined. More was being demanded of them, and they suddenly needed a different kind of leadership. They needed an addition to the visionary type of leadership and the values leadership that they'd had when they started. They needed somebody to help them figure out how to get the job done. And so this collided quite well between Bunker and I to sort of split this kind of responsibility so that I give them a very different sort of support than Bunker does. I give them a different kind of confidence to go forward and to try new things. And I try to support them in the way that they can risk a bit. Maybe they fail, but it's not so serious. We protect them from that. And it's a little bit of a process in helping them to go through this passage of
initiation.
Yeah. I don't see my role as somebody to replace. I never thought I was someone to replace Bunker. I never thought I was someone who was going to be identified with the organization in a very iconic way. What I hoped I would do is what a great headmistress at a very old boarding school does, is to safeguard and evolve a vision and a set of values to keep them relevant and to keep them vibrant and growing into the future. And to keep what Bunker really believed in the beginning as part of everybody's day-to-day awareness. Because in an institutionalized organization, an older organization which passes through a different type of trajectory than a new startup, you have a different sense of laissez-faire, very comfortable feeling. You're working somewhere 15, 20, 30, 40 years. You need different kinds of challenges sent your way, and you need to sort of embrace those differently. So I always saw my role as a sort of semi-disruptor, somebody to teach some critical thinking skills so people could start to really be self-critical and not need Bunker to be critical of them. Can you critique your own work, or do you need somebody from the outside? And those are skills I think are essential for leaders, to have going forward. So my goal was always to be a presence for a period of time, to drive the staff to move and to develop themselves to meet the needs and the opportunities of this great organization, and to try to contribute in some way.
Oh, talking of leadership, how do you define leadership?
Oh gosh, I think there are so many different kinds of leadership.
What's your flavor of it?
And I think there are different leadership skills for different scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
So the way I would lead on a mountain is very different from the way I would lead a team in Telonia. Yes, there are some things that carry forward. Unfortunately, when faced with great adversity, I'm a very move forward decisively kind of person. I don't waffle around at that moment. But I think certainly reflection, the ability to reflect, the ability to learn in the moment when you are most sure you know. This skill to stop yourself, and to
come
say,
to that moment of
exactly,
maybe I don't know,
right on the
and
precipice,
yeah.
you know, thinking I know what to do here, and then suddenly you have to say, wait a minute, maybe I don't know what I'm doing here, and that's okay too.
Yes.
And you know, sometimes you take a step forward, you have to pull yourself back, and you take a different step in a different direction. So I don't think it's an absolute thing. I think it's about being reactive, adaptive, perseverant, yes, a risk taker, but hugely compassionate. The hardest part of the personal journey for me has been how to keep my strength and at the same time be utterly vulnerable in a human sense.
Yes. Because
this work is human work, and it demands something absolutely different than what I ever imagined.
What a boardroom, for example, in a male-dominated arena may otherwise demand. I want to talk about that actually, because I myself had a 25-year career, mostly working in totally male-dominated roles or environments, and very often I've been the only woman doing that role. And you know, it started when I was very young. And one of the things that I learned very early on in my 20s was that I started to behave a little bit like a guy. And I felt so unhappy, and I felt like something was seriously wrong. But in order to compete, in order to win, that was, you know, in those, you had to,
Absolutely.
You had no choice.
Yeah.
But I very quickly learned that, you know, that wasn't real confidence. That in order to really be myself and express who I am in those arenas, then I needed to bring her out, you know, and she was good enough.
But you know, in the early 80s, we were ashamed of she, because we were told she wasn't good enough, and that she had to be he. And so I lived through that same journey, you know, getting out of university and fighting for equal pay, having to work twice as hard, doing twice as good a job just to get half as much recognition. Exactly. And then I arrived suddenly, you know, very free as an entrepreneur, no longer needing to really deal with that kind of political situation, and that suited me very well. But at Barefoot, it's something beyond that. Moving into a human sector work where, you know, your compassion, your humility, your humanity.
They have a value. In fact,
they
deliver
huge
results.
Value.
Yeah,
I had to retake those back, and I'm still learning to really develop those in ways that merge and fit with my more male way of approaching things. And I knew that Bunker and I would work well together because there were a few things early on that came up, situations that came up in our work where it was very clear that a particular response was demanded. And in every case, he and I would arrive, when push came to shove, with exactly the same response as being a human response. We thought first about the woman, first about the human being, and then we worried about the money or anything else that came after that. And so I ultimately sort of was able to trust that it's okay. We may disagree. on how we get from A to B, but when push comes to shove, we are absolutely aligned in our priorities.
So is there other parallels that we can share, or you can share with women on boards who are challenged with, the aspect of being outnumbered in a board situation, in a leadership situation?
I have a mathematician father, and I grew up with him saying to me, the truth is always in the numbers. And I have learned one can be incredibly feminine and female in your point of view, provided you
produce
have
the results,
the numbers,
yeah,
and also the grasp of the data.
Yeah.
So this is a very compelling foil, I find, for being able to have a lot of leeway on a particular point of view, because you've got to substantiate it. Any idea that you can, throw around a more sort of more soft point of view, or less hard priorities, without being able to back up why that's important, why you feel that's an issue. And I mean, this comes to the women's empowerment question that you were talking about with Bunker. Why empower women? Well, there's $3 trillion up for grab if we just get to equal pay to pump into the economy, among many, many, many other things. And the opportunity, if we start leveraging the human potential that exists in the world within 50% of the population.
It's transformational.
It's transformational.
Life-altering,
We recently were at the Dadaab refugee camp in Kenya on the Somali-Kenya border, and for me it was a very powerful experience because we were speaking to hundreds of young women trapped in this refugee camp, and you're looking at these faces look at you like, do something for me. And you think, but maybe someone sitting here is a mathematician and could solve some amazing theorem. Maybe somebody here is a biochemist. Maybe somebody here is, incredibly technologically savvy. And what are we wasting? These human beings, these beautiful girls and women who want to participate, and we relegate them to, absolutely undervalued potential over and over and over again, because they wear a veil, or they don't look the part, or they, have the misfortune to be in a disadvantaged situation. And the judgments that get made about women in those situations is far more severe than men.
How do you? It's hard enough to put out, to develop, and to put into action disruptive technologies and mechanisms, if you like, social technologies and mechanisms in India, but you're doing it across more than 50 countries. And I know you've created alliances and partnership, since you've been involved with Barefoot College in over 72 countries. So, how do you make that effective?
Well, focus. I'm a big believer in make it simple, keep it clear, keep what you're doing very, very focused on certain impacts. And there are people that criticize that because they'd like to see us move left, right, and center, including Bunker sometimes. He gets, wants to address other things. And I'm just a big believer in if you're going to be decentralized, the only way that can be successful and maintain quality impact is if you're extremely clear and focused in your model. So we've spent a lot of time cleaning that up and clearing that up. And then it's all about the partnerships. It's about who you choose as your partners. And the problem is we often talk about partnerships as if there's an assumed equality there. But in general, most partnerships are unequal. One of you is more capable, in power more than the other. And so I really look for partners who are going to make us stronger. And I'm very choosy about those partnerships because I know that we don't have the staff and the resources to micromanage everything. So we need everybody to be doing their part in that. So that is one of the keys to the way we've been able to scale is both with local ground partners who have vested interests and long-term presence in their communities. So partnering with people who are going to stay there, who are going to be there. And this avoids us having to put staff all over the world. So we've got this network, this incredible network, who we learn from. And we learn wonderful things from them. We learn about that local culture. We learn and we listen to what they tell us about the habits of people in those communities. And that lets us tailor the different models to what will be accepted by communities. And then we really look at disrupting social norms. What are the mechanisms that have created the inequality or created the system in the first place? How do we deconstruct those without taking them on head on? The Women's Solar Engineering Initiative is not something we ever talk about with a community being a gender equalizing program, but it is a gender equalizer unlike any other. And more than being a gender equalizer, it shifts the civil society mechanisms in a community because of some of the stakeholder commitments that we ask for from the community. And that happens without people knowing it. We don't need to talk about gender. It happens when she returns to the community, puts solar systems in every household, climbs up on all the roofs, turns on the lights, and gives people the one thing they want more than anything else, which is to turn on a light, charge their mobile phone, and be able to work in the evenings. And so we don't need to talk about gender. And in one way, I think much more of this kind of approach is really needed. Creating opportunity for people to escape social norms that are unhealthy is a far better mechanism towards impact than trying to go in and preach to them about why they shouldn't do something. Somebody comes to you and tells you not to do something. The first thing you're inclined to do is say, I'm going to do more of that, actually. So I don't think this works. I think the only thing we've learned is that you have to give people opportunity to escape the habits that they currently have and show them the benefit of new habits, and then do a bit of policing around the sides of that to make sure things move for a period of time. And once they get into a good habit, then it does start on its own, and you can let go. We look at everything as how can we do ourselves out of a job? We'd like to be out of business.
And of course, in that same vein, one of the things that you have expressed quite clearly is that you want to use digital integration to be able to do that, both within your organization and in the communities in which you work. So put the technology in the hands of the women, if you like, or people.
In India now, more and more of the entitlements, access to different kinds of banking options and payment options, access to subsidies on fuel and basic sorts of things are all being managed digitally. Well, what do you do if you're in a rural area, you don't have access to energy, and you can't read or write? You are even further from this digital divide. And that's moving at Mach speed.
Yes.
You know, daily it's growing just by Mach speed. And so I look at the map of the places in the world where girls' education is the lowest, where women's literacy rates are the lowest, and the map of the world where access to energy is the worst, and the map of the world where conflict exists in the hottest spots, or radicalism. And guess what? It's the same map. So this is not a mystery. This is absolutely the sweet spot where we must design into. And that's why I am such a strong believer in digital tools, because they allow you to create specific content, relevant content, make that accessible to many people in very quick and self-learning, simplified ways. And it is the only answer, I think, to getting to scale on women's literacy and women's skill building. I just don't think we can anymore think we're going to get everybody into a school. I don't think this is realistic. I think even for our kids in the developed world, self-learning skills are essential. Essential. You have to be able to know where to go for information, how to seek out the information you want. You want to teach yourself from the internet. And there's this incredible thing, the internet. And for rural poor people who can't read and write, it's not accessible to them. And they're angry.
Yeah.
This is one of the fundamental places where
You need it.
Inequality is felt in everybody knows about the internet. You go in the wilds of Brazil, you go in the wilds of Kenya and Tanzania.
Yeah.
I can tell you everybody knows the internet, and they're angry they don't have it. They don't even know what they'll use it for half of the time, but they're sure life would be better if they had access to it.
Yeah.
And I think if we continue to play with this, we will just invite more and more and more instability. In the absence and vacuum of good information will come bad. And it's much more destructive and much harder to undo than to just put good information out there and accessible.
Yeah. Get technology that's reachable and affordable by those people, which indeed is partly, I know we talked about a couple of projects that you're engaged in that area.
The other thing about technology is we have seen there is absolutely nothing that gives a woman more confidence and competence, sense of belief in her ability, than to master a piece of technology. Technology has this amazing transformational quality, just by nature of its complexity, that if you feel you can master it, you feel you can learn anything.
Anything, yeah. It does give so much confidence, indeed. Yeah, and it shifts your own perception of yourself.
Yes.
Which is what's required when we're talking about empowerment of any kind, and especially with women, where you start to shift the way that they feel about themselves, Question I have for you, and it comes from our conversation of yesterday. We were talking about the distinction between an NGO and a true social enterprise, and you gave this beautiful answer. Can you share that again, please? The distinction that you shared yesterday really encapsulates it for me.
Yeah. So for me, and this is an opinion I've come to, both from working and also from doing an awful lot of learning about this space in the last 7 years. I look at what we do and I think a classic NGO delivers a program in a community. That's one end of the spectrum, and they do that in a linear way. And a social business, delivers and makes accessible at reasonable prices, but for profit, products that very poor people may not have ever had access to. But they do not get involved in anything beyond selling a product and perhaps enabling one or two entrepreneurs to sell that product. We do something very different. We both deliver programs that are designed specifically to deliver and to change quality of life in communities, be that access to energy, water management, hygiene, women's health and wellness, and livelihood development. We also look at very deeply what are the social norms and the barriers and the systems within communities which have created those inequalities. And we look to design to disrupt those and to interrupt those and to try to get rid of those so that the system within communities works better and more equanimous for people in that community. And lastly, we work always on government advocacy, because our goal is not to fund through philanthropic or even social enterprise models to resolve a problem. It's to help governments to learn that there are solutions in poor communities that enable those communities to be self-sufficient, much more economically vibrant, able to join a more mainstream economic growth, and to add to GDP, because that is the portion of the pyramid which must come up if any of the developing world countries want to really see sustainable long-term growth economically. So we're really looking at rewiring the mindset of government in many, many cases to think in much more decentralized, much more human-centric ways, and in programs that are able to be maintained and developed and cared for and sustained by communities themselves without them involved. That's
outstanding.
that's
Absolutely outstanding. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank
you
so
very much.